Operator here. Welcome to the Cyberpunk Matrix podcast, your one-stop shop for everything cyberpunk. In just a second, we're going to connect you to the cyberspace. So hold on to your seatbelt, Dorothy, because Kansas is going bye-bye.
Hello and welcome. This is your host, Alex, and you have reached the Cyberpunk Matrix podcast, your one-stop shop for everything cyberpunk. Today I'm joined by a published chemist and electro-optics researcher who also happens to be a cyberpunk author. His first novel, Europa, is available now on Amazon. Please welcome to the program, Elias J. Hurst.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, that's it's a great introduction.
Well, thank you for being here. So, Elias, I really appreciate you being able to come on to the show on such short notice. And we'll go jump right into it with, can't get more basic than this, but what's your definition of cyberpunk?
Oh, man. So this is a tough question. And actually, I was checking out your website and noticed you had is this cyberpunk section of your website, because it's such a big question.
Definitely.
And I should preface my response by saying I am by no means a historian of cyberpunk, in terms of knowing great details about the 60s and 70s and then the comics and Gibson in the 80s. But I suppose even if I was, or as I, will kind of eventually be, given my interest in this, I'm not terribly interested in guarding the definition of cyberpunk. And, sort of what I mean by that is when you have a genre and you kind of put up walls around it and defend those borders, you can end up suffocating it. And, my opinion is really that creative content needs evolution and innovation to thrive. So I'm pretty careful about how I look at that question of what is or isn't cyberpunk. With all of those qualifications said, though, I think there's kind of three things that I look at. And if the, media in question has maybe two of those three, then yeah, I'd probably call it cyberpunk. So for me, that's a corporate controlled government, or a government that is a corporation. Transhumanism and or human augmentation. And then really a high level of integration with a virtual reality of some kind, be that really a game or something like the Matrix where it is reality. So yeah, when I look at things, kind of if it checks two of those boxes, I guess that's cyberpunk enough for me.
Okay. So it's interesting that you say there's three main things, but it could check just two of the three boxes, but not one of the three boxes, it sounds like. So you could have corporations and virtual reality, but not transhumanism, or transhumanism and virtual reality, but not a corporation. Is that correct? It could still be cyberpunk?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to have all three of those, but I kind of feel like it's the combination of any two of those elements that, for me, bends it into cyberpunk. Okay.
And that's very interesting. I mean, I would definitely agree that we don't want to suffocate what is or isn't and not play gatekeeping at all. And that's because the reason why I wanted to create this is the cyberpunk subsection on the blog is because I do feel like there's a certain amount of gatekeeping on Reddit or on Facebook groups or things like this where people say, oh, this is or this isn't, or you can't call it that, or that's a joke, and I think that is a bit suffocating. But I think it's also useful to label. I mean, myself, I'm a teacher. I teach English, not cyberpunk, although that would be cool. But I think it's useful to know, like, we can talk across each other if we don't have the basics, the same underlying values or assumptions. So making that clear that this is what is and this is what isn't cyberpunk, or at least creating an atmosphere for a dialogue and discussion, I think is very useful. So I've had a couple of different guests come on the show, and I've never had someone say, well, these are 3 or 4 or 2 themes. Check a couple of them, and the more you get it, the closer you get to it. One typical way of describing cyberpunk is saying high tech, low life, right? So this kind of short motto. And I noticed in your definition, you don't have any type of low life punk aspect in your 3 things, which I guess might come as a rebel responding to corporations. But what do you think about that? Do you think that having some sort of punk, quote unquote, is necessary for cyberpunk, or is it just part of the name, but it's not necessary?
I think it is necessary because the punk aspect of this speaks to the dystopian elements of cyberpunk and how often the protagonist or central characters are fighting against some type of dystopian control or system. And so it's important to have that punk in there. And, where does the low life come into maybe the 3 criteria I'm looking at is, typically if you have a corporate controlled environment, that tends to not work well for people. I think we have yet to encounter a truly benevolent corporation. And to a degree, the human augmentation and transhumanism, I think, tends to create a lot of inequality in the stories of cyberpunk. And that forces a lot of people into kind of a low life sort of mentality, right? Where they have limited access to some technologies that wealthier parties are able to use to sort of sustain their advantage and their control and power. Sure.
Definitely. I would agree. That's why, one of the first, I didn't know what this term was. Was it 3 or 4 years ago? I feel like I'm somewhat of a newbie. And then I found this website called Cyberpunk Dystopia. I'm not sure if you're familiar. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Neon Dystopia about the cyberpunk genre. And I had never thought about dystopia as kind of an important aspect of it until I looked at it and I saw, oh yeah, that makes sense. And that's why I think it's interesting to look at almost all the stories I've seen so far have some sort of, this is not a perfect happy place. That often can be delivered through corporations, through transhumanism gone wrong, or augmentations gone wrong, or virtual reality controlling us to a certain sense. But I feel like really it is not a perfect world, which is why one of my blog posts I looked at Tomorrowland as the opposite of cyberpunk, this, or at least this ideal utopia that, Tomorrowland is what maybe corporations say that we could be through the technology that they offer us. But cyberpunk is the thing that we actually get to a certain extent.
Yeah, that's a great way to summarize it.
Well, okay, but let's move on because there's so much more I want to ask. This was just the first question. How did you get into the cyberpunk genre? When did you first get into it, and what was the thing for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'd say it was late 2019. I published a sci-fi novel Europa, and I didn't know that it was cyberpunk until people started telling me it was, or saying, hey, this has a lot of cyberpunk elements in it.
Wow, no way. But it's
yeah.
Hold on. So you published Europa, not knowing it was cyberpunk, and then people told you it was, and then you changed the cover art, because I looked it up on Amazon. It's called a Cyberpunk Chronicle. Was that post created, or was that always? How'd that work?
Yeah, no, absolutely. As I sort of had more people review and react to it, and I was getting this feedback, on the cyberpunk and noir elements of it, I really did change a lot of my marketing. And part of that was I had a few people, readers, I would say, who were perhaps rightly kind of pissed, picking it up thinking it was going to be a space book, and it isn't.
Right, because Europa is a planet, right?
Right, and somewhat misleadingly, the intro of the book is all about this mission that's supposed to happen to Europa.
Mm-hmm.
So it was pretty important to make clear to people that the mission never leaves, and that's kind of the whole point of the book, really.
Oh, okay, interesting. Well, unfortunately, I have not read it yet. I would love to pick up a copy at some point to check it out. Okay, so you wrote it not knowing what cyberpunk was, actually, and so you could say that your introduction to cyberpunk was through your own novel.
That sounds like a really weird way to put it, but yes, and
I
to
mean,
a degree, I guess.
that's super badass. I think. I mean, it's like, oh, I saw The Matrix, or I saw Blade Runner. Oh, I wrote my own book. That's how I got into the genre. That's really great.
It's it's a term I think I had heard, but I didn't really know what it was, and it was only when I was talking with people about Europa that I learned, like, oh, cyberpunk is the name for this collection of things that I really like.
Mm-hmm. So you found out about the term just recently, and I guess now that you know what it is, so you recognized it in 2019. I think that's actually around when I realized it too. I think it was late 2018, beginning 2019 that I discovered what it was, just through looking at, I mean, I think it was actually Neon Dystopia again that introduced me to that term, and I saw, oh yeah, all these things that I like all fit in the same kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
What is your favorite? Well, I want to ask you another question, but I don't want to get disorganized here, so I'm just going to stick to it. What's your favorite cyberpunk media now that you know what that term is?
So this is going to be like one of those time travel thrillers where things start going back on each other. But my favorite cyberpunk media is for sure the very first Deus Ex video game.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah,
and I played that in my teen years, not knowing again that it was cyberpunk. Just
sure.
that whatever this game was, I loved it. I could not step away from it.
And then you kind of, as you learned more what it was, you revisited. Is there any more recent cyberpunk media that you really like?
Oh yeah. Well, I guess I'll take a minute to plug something that's a screening on Cyberpunk Day, but the Venus short film. It's a short film directed by Andrew McGee.
Okay.
And it's probably the most recent cyberpunk, media I've seen, and just really impressed with the story. There's a unique challenge to any kind of short form where you have to pack this character development arc and have some type of plot in such a short amount of time. And Venus really achieves that. And it's impressive that it was all done on sort of an indie Kickstarter budget, and the effects, the visuals, everything are stunning.
That sounds great. I haven't actually watched it yet. I wanted to watch it, and then I saw that it was going to get screened, and I thought, okay, maybe I should wait until the right moment and give it its due focus and appreciation, and not just watch it casually on the side. But that leads into a great segue. Okay, so you didn't know what the term was cyberpunk until you published your book in 2019. Then shortly after 2019, you learned what cyberpunk was, and then all of a sudden you're helping create Cyberpunk Day. That I only knew what it was last year in 2020, I believe. So tell me a bit about, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk to you today and not in a couple of weeks, because Cyberpunk Day is next Sunday, if I'm not mistaken, or Monday, right?
Next Sunday, that's right. It's October 10th.
October 10th. Okay, next Sunday. So tell me, what is Cyberpunk Day for those listeners who aren't familiar?
Sure. Yeah. So Cyberpunk Day at the highest level is just a celebration of everything cyberpunk. So any type of media that is cyberpunk, the day exists to celebrate it. And, I would say Matt and I together, Matthew A. Goodwin, sometimes look at this and we understand the acknowledgement of kind of rolling your eyes and being like, oh man, another day. There's a day for everything now. Do we really need a cyberpunk day?
Yeah.
And I totally get that.
Of course we
and
do.
the reason to push, that kind of format, what I want to say is, in a really noisy digital scape, sometimes the best way to make an impact and really reach people is to concentrate your efforts. And I really think having that focus around a short time period gives us the greatest impact. And, our mission is to help existing fans of Cyberpunk find new things within Cyberpunk. So if you go to cyberpunkday.com, you can find a recommendations area, and those are really, personal recommendations written by various contributors. And we really try to focus on lesser known works. I mean, there's some, very recognizable names there, but we really try to highlight things that are kind of below that big budget level, so that maybe you haven't seen them before. And I would say the second part of our purpose is really to try and find people like me who love Cyberpunk and don't realize it.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting because, I noticed the lineup was recently published, I think, on Twitter, and a lot of the pieces that I saw were not things that were, like it wasn't William Gibson. It wasn't like seeing Blade Runner, the 1984, 1986 viewing of it, like the original Ridley Scott. It wasn't, I don't know, what a reading from passages of Neuromancer. It was all this new stuff and all these different authors and writers and indie filmmakers, like you said, who created Venus, coming together. And so it's like, oh wow, it's not just all these old or older classics. It's still very much being created nowadays, and it's so interesting to connect with these different authors and enthusiasts, I guess.
Well, I'm happy to hear you say that, because that's really what I think we would hope people would think when they look at this. Because of course you can go to Wikipedia and find everything you need to know about, Gibson or, Philip K. Dick or any of the really, seminal works of the genre, but it's still, it's alive and thriving, and there's so much new and undiscovered content yet.
Yeah. I would say that, I feel like a really good way, I hope that we'll be able to see it a little bit for Cyberpunk Day, is to take new fans or modern day enthusiasts and introduce them to more new stuff based on the old stuff that they like. So I believe that there are different kinds of cyberpunk enthusiasts. I'm curious to see which one you are. But for example, a lot of people like Blade Runner. I don't care for it personally that much. I mean, it's starting to grow on me. I've heard that there are people who didn't like Blade Runner the first 10 or 12 viewings, and then eventually they started liking it. But I feel like, people who like Deus Ex, for example, like I played Human Revolution, I believe it was. And it's much of a slower game. And the same kind with books, there's these like slower paced, maybe a bit more technical or heavy kinds of books. And then there's the more faster paced video games or faster paced books or movies. And I'm definitely more of the latter, that I enjoy more of the Matrix variety and the Battle Angel Alita variety than the slow, thoughtful Blade Runner 2049, for example. But there are others that are the reverse, that they are like, oh, this silly action stuff, I'm not into that, or it's too weird. But I like the slow, thoughtful, more philosophical focused kinds of media. So I feel like, I guess what I'm saying is there are different favorites for different people in Cyberpunk. And you can say, oh, you got to watch Venus because it's like more like a Blade Runner, or you should watch this Matrix 4 because it's more like, I don't know, Snow Crash, or I don't know, something like that. Like you take a more modern, you should read Bubbles in Space or Europa, because it's more like Neuromancer, or more like, I don't know, whatever the vein would be.
No, I
So,
think that's a fantastic idea to kind of use that as like a navigational tool toward content. What have you read before that's sort of one of those defining works, and
mhm.
what things have similar elements? I like that idea.
And how did you connect with Matthew Goodwin specifically? Because we had him on the show last week, or last episode. I've been kind of very busy. Haven't been able to publish quite every week. But how did you connect with Matthew Goodwin? Were you in a writing? Are there secret writing groups online, or how did you get into the Cyberpunk day that he kind of started?
Yeah, absolutely. To answer your question, yes, there are many secret Facebook, Discord, whatever else groups, and yeah, there are so many Discord servers that you get invited to this server, that server. But an invitation came around, and I joined the group, and it was just a group of authors who have an interest in cyberpunk.
Mhm.
And this idea of Cyberpunk Day was floating around in the group. I want to say it was like mid-August. They were trying to have it started, October 10th last year. And there was so much to put in place yet. There was no website. There was nothing for Cyberpunk Day. And I guess if any one thing kind of sucked me into it, I helped get our website together, pretty short time there. And, my involvement just snowballed from that. And here I am now.
It's super exciting. And I heard from reliable source, which I guess, again, was the publication on Twitter, that you guys have Mike Pondsmith, the Cyberpunk Red writer. Is that correct? As a guest?
That's right. Yeah. So Matthew was able to organize an interview with Mike Pondsmith, which was incredible. When he told me, I couldn't believe it. I was so excited. He's definitely got a talent on that side of things, where I'm a little more logistical and aesthetic on the website and the art and things like that. But
yeah,
the response to this event has been great.
That's wonderful. I remember when I was joining all these different groups who were really excited about the Cyberpunk 2077 video game, and a lot of attention was paid to him and him creating the tabletop game that where they drew a lot of the inspiration for the video game, and like, what are the characters and what is the lore that he wrote from his game, so we know about this upcoming video game. And then, of course, Cyberpunk 2077 released, and there are mixed reviews. I personally liked it a lot. I don't think it's my favorite, but I don't think it's bad either. But yeah, so let me go back to some of the other questions I had. You have a very interesting background, because you're not just a writer, you know the science behind some of the high tech that we see, right? So, I mean, you're a chemist and electro-optics researcher. I'm just looking at your bio on Amazon here. You have a background of toxicology, photonics, and millimeter wave communications. What do you do now? Is this cyberpunk stuff just a side job to you working in a lab and saving the world, or like what?
Well,
yeah. What do you do now?
Yeah, I'm a chemist, and they don't let me in the lab anymore, and that's probably better for everyone. I was never a particularly skilled synthetic chemist. I'll never be Heisenberg if crap hits the fan. We'll say that. And so really my role now is more in a product management type of capacity. So it's a mix of, marketing and product development and things like that. And yeah, I've been lucky to have some great opportunities, working in the telecom industry, really focusing on technologies that went into radar systems, 5G communication, things like that. And that had a huge influence on the technologies in Europa. In my personal perspective, in terms of, weapons of war, I think the real new frontier is electronic warfare. And a lot of that really comes down to RF electronics and, not only detecting, but disrupting other electronics. And I really enjoyed those concepts and kind of taking my limited knowledge in that space. And I'll say, despite working, in that area for several years, it's such a technical field that I would really say my knowledge of it is really limited. But even just pulling some concepts and, applying those in Europa was a lot of fun for me. For readers, I've heard some mixed things. Some people really enjoy that it has a little bit of that hard science in it. For others, they've shared that the science was like a little bit too heavy. And so sometimes those were parts that they kind of flipped through. So, it's one of those things. I think people have different tastes when it comes to that.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I think, everyone has their own personal interest. But that all that stuff, 5G and everything, that's very interesting. And that leads me to my next question. Do you think we live in a cyberpunk world now, or is it in the near future? Is it the far future?
Let's all look at the far, far future, because it's certainly, as we said, dystopian and not a happy place.
Sure.
But, looking more, I guess, directly at like some of the ways I define cyberpunk, looking at, corporate control and transhumanism, virtual reality. There's certainly plenty of examples of corporations exerting influence on the government. I think of what's happening with NASA and Blue Origin right now.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Jeff Bezos.
Yeah.
And his interestingly shaped shuttle.
Yeah, I really enjoyed all of the Austin Powers memes that came about as a result of that shuttle.
I got to take a look at those. I've heard of those, but yeah.
But, is that really to the level of what we see in Cyberpunk? Not yet, in my opinion. And similarly with, kind of human augmentation, we have very crude brain computer interfaces, but really it's a while before we're there.
Yeah.
And same thing with the virtual reality. So I think it's a near future thing.
Okay. All right. So not far future, but not like now either. Yeah. We have little snippets of that, right? So we have Boston Dynamics with their robots. We have China with its very strict social currency. I read the other day that China was banning certain video games with certain themes in it, like where you have to make moral choices in a certain way. That just seems very, very strict to me. You have a lot of things that Elon Musk is trying to do, like the Neuralink, the brain connections, and then we have Space Force. And we have a series making fun of Space Force, but we have like a legit Space Force. I was listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about it with an actual member of the Space Force. And no, it's serious. Like they have an actual section now. And it made me wonder, when you were talking about the electronics that you've seen in your field, well, electronics battles in space, disrupting each other's satellites. Will that be a major thing in the future or in the near future? I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're touching on why, jokes aside, the Space Force sounds dumb, but you think about the damage that could be done if a nefarious agent of some kind destroyed a whole bunch of satellites that were owned by one particular nation or group of nations. Yeah, that would be pretty major impact to a lot of systems. So,
and it wouldn't even be that difficult. Where they're thinking about having internet being given to certain areas through satellites instead of through like on the ground, and you can imagine all they need is to speed up any object that would cause damage to a satellite at a specific time in orbit, and there are no proper protections, I think, to guard. So anyways, I'm getting off on a tangent here, but it's there's
it's
so
an
many
interesting
things.
tangent.
There's so many things that we could see in the near future. All right, going from dystopian future to fun future, are there any cyberpunk media that you're looking forward to that's coming out? Either video games, movies, TV series, books?
I'm really excited for The Matrix 4.
Oh, thank you for saying that.
Top of my list, no question.
Okay. So you didn't see the trailer and you said, no, you were excited when the trailer was released.
Well, I kind of felt like the trailer at least made it seem like there's going to be a rehashing of a lot of concepts from the first movie. And
sure,
maybe that, that gives me some hesitation, I guess. But
okay.
To be honest, I would be thrilled by a remaster of the first. So maybe my bar is low, but I have a feeling the story is going to be a lot more involved and nuanced than that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Have you been following any of the news about like why it was created, or the actors that are in it, or like why it's just Lana and not Lily, or any of that stuff?
No. I mean, aside from Keanu saying he loved the script and that's why he made it, I don't know anything else of the.
Okay, so this news was relatively recent. Well, I don't know. I follow my own YouTube channels like Neomatrixology, who was a guest on this podcast as well. It was the second or third episode, I believe. And Lana gave an interview shortly after the trailer dropped where she explained that Matrix 4 was actually a way for Lana to cope with the grief of her loss with her parents. And so Lily dealt with the grief in a different way, and that's why she didn't want to revisit the trilogy, because she felt like it was a done deal. It was in the past. It is not changing anything. But as Lana was revisiting The Matrix, a script came to her mind, it came to her, and being able to bring Neo and Trinity back, these characters that were so important to her when she was younger, it helped process that grief. So I think that's an interesting source that, this one's going to be more relationship focused and maybe a bit more. I mean, I don't know if this is a source to help her deal with her grief. Does that mean there's going to be a lot of grief in the film, or processing of grief, or resurrections means she literally is like bringing these characters back to life. So I'm very curious to see, like, with that understanding, what she's going to do with the film.
Yeah, that's a great thought to share, and I'm sitting here, my brain's spinning, so I'm trying to think of how to talk and process all of these ideas. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's great to hear that there's a really powerful, emotive idea behind the new movie.
Yeah.
And
because they were approached by Warner Brothers apparently many, many times saying, you want this truckload of money? How about this truckload of money? And they're always like, no, we finished. It was the 3 and it's done. And what changed? Their parents died, So that's like, okay, that's a good reason to I guess revisit it, give the fans what they want. And I really hope that this also leads to maybe a series, maybe not under Lana Wachowski, but with her blessing or something like that, because there's so many stories. I mean, if you saw the Animatrix, did you see the Animatrix as well?
I've seen a little bit of it, and that was quite a long time ago. But As you were talking about that, I was thinking of that as well, and how fun it would be to have more spin-off type stories in the same universe.
There's so much potential here. There's so many little stories that I really enjoyed all these different little stories from the Animatrix. And also, you may not have seen this. If you liked a lot The Matrix 1, 2, and 3, and you're curious to see unshown footage, when they released was it Enter the Matrix, they shot all this additional footage, like live footage with the actual actors, to go alongside the video game. So you can go online, either on cyberpunkmatrix.com or just on YouTube, and just search Enter the Matrix footage. And it's about 45 minutes altogether of all these scenes that you've never seen anywhere else. And it's shocking how much they put into it at the time, in addition to doing 2 and 3 filmed back to back, but also these extra scenes for the video game.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I had no idea. So I will be checking that out.
It's really great. If you liked the scene with Persephone in Matrix Reloaded, where she's trying to get a kiss, she does that with Ghost, and she does that with Niobe. And I thought that was really interesting. Really interesting. I never thought of seeing that scene again, but with a different character. So anyways, you'll have fun with that today, I'm sure.
I will. Yeah, that will be my evening, it sounds like.
Okay. So back to the question. Okay. So you're looking forward to Matrix 4. That's right. Okay. Myself as well. The final question I'd have for you, I feel like you have a bit of a finger on the pulse of the cyberpunk sphere, I would say. What is the state of the cyberpunk genre nowadays in terms of like, okay, Lana's coming back and she's putting in her 2 cents with Matrix 4. We had Cyberpunk 2077 release in January of this year. We have Cowboy Bebop coming out. Oh my goodness. And other things like this. Do you feel like the cyberpunk genre is still like growing, or is it kind of stagnating? Is it going back? Did it get a hit after the the lack of success that was expected for all the hype with Cyberpunk 2077? And how do you feel about the people you've been meeting, other cyberpunk authors and creators? Are they like friendly, or are they like kind of, I don't know, hostile? Do they keep to themselves? Like, what's been your experience with that?
Interesting. Yeah, I would say cyberpunk is growing and perhaps is at the cusp of mainstream. And I say that because, obviously The Matrix is a huge movie. Millions of people are going to watch it.
Mm-hmm. I hope so.
But how many people watch it and watch it knowing, hey, this is a cyberpunk movie? Or will it even be a cyberpunk movie? I don't know how they could avoid that. But so I would say cyberpunk as a genre is maybe right at the cusp of mainstream, where there's some really big mainstream works out there, but maybe not everyone realizes that's what it is.
Okay. That makes a lot of
Cyberpunk
sense.
2077 is an interesting case because I think that was, a chance to really bring the term cyberpunk to the forefront. And
sure,
it certainly got a lot of press, both bad and good. And, I think over time it will probably become a little bit more like, game am I thinking of? No Man's Sky, where, the release was kind of a mess, but over time they've really been able to bring the game to what it was meant to be at release. And I hope that same thing can happen with Cyberpunk 2077.
Yeah. I'm hoping that they'll be able to like add to it, maybe a 2078 or just a new DLC or some sort of story that adds to it, because they already have such a good foundation. Now that if they take 2 or 3 years to iron out all the bugs to realize what would be a good kind of story to add to it, they can really take it good places. But I'm also a little concerned that it will have gone so far that anyone that hears the word cyberpunk will think, oh, you're talking about the game. Oh no, I'm talking about the whole genre. It's a lot more than just a game. And they'll be like, what? So I hope they won't think, like, even with a Google search, you're looking for cyberpunk and all your hits are about the game, or at least that's how it used to be.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I was just having the same thought, that what you're describing has happened with SEO, that Cyberpunk 2077 dominates any search related to cyberpunk. And, in its focus, I would say Cyberpunk 2077 adheres to a lot of really kind of central and well-established concepts of cyberpunk, and maybe isn't terribly exploratory in terms of the environment and the story.
Mm-hmm.
I liked the addition of, the nomads and acknowledging that, in a dystopian future, people will live outside of the cities.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe not a whole lot of innovation on the genre in Cyberpunk 2077. And so if there's maybe any, I guess, negative impact of that game getting really big, that would be what I would say, because I, personally feel wary of Cyberpunk becoming just Cyberpunk 2077 and Blade Runner. And those are the two aesthetics that it can be.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of opportunity for it growing to become something different. And that's kind of why I'm so excited about Matrix 4, is because we've already seen 3 matrices. Right, I'm not talking about the actual mathematical term, I'm talking about the movies, where it has the green tint versus the blue tint. And now to have this different varied color palette, and it's a different kind of thing while still being familiar. I love that it's new. It could have very easily just been like a rehash completely of the first one. And while it does have some things that are similar, I think it's meant to be that. And there's even I'm wondering if there's going to be a sense that it's aware of its being similar to the first one, because in the trailer there's a scene in Matrix 4 of a projection of Matrix 1 on the wall. And so that would mean that the characters in Matrix 4 are familiar with Matrix 1. The specific scene is the scene when Neo is waking up and he touches the mirror. And so I've never seen that before. How can a movie in the movie have a projection on the wall of the prequel of that movie? You know what I mean? Like, that's very meta.
It's super meta. And, but if any like universe in terms of like a creative universe could accept something that meta, the Matrix could, because of
Absolutely.
course, maybe Neo exists in a world where the Matrix is a movie.
Yeah, that's too much to think about.
And that's when smoke comes out of your ears and
well,
you go cross-eyed.
And an interest to keep the smoke in our ears. Thank you so much, Elias, for coming on today.
Yeah, absolutely. I've really, enjoyed our chat, and I appreciate your insights on the genre.
You have just been in the cyberspace with your host, Alex. Welcome back to the desert of the real. If your upload was smooth, leave a 5-star review on iTunes and subscribe for more content.